basically this paper um, provides a summary of sorts about the marketing data and analytics history and where we are and what needs to be done in the future. Okay, that's kind of the aim of this paper, and it's widely referenced and cited by other many journals, because it kind of provides a direction, because of that reason. So see, data is available now in large scale, right? So that big data is spawning data driven decisions, in companies, and the success of industry leaders on this has helped us recognize that we can leverage big data to support marketing decisions. And this, because of this, entirely new forms of marketing have emerged, say like recommendations, geofencing, search marketing, retargeting. A lot of these new areas of or new ways of marketing have emerged, just because of this data and web and internet, right? So that's the context. And so they are first going into the history, and they'll tell you a brief amount of that, and then they'll get to where we are, and then they'll move on to what we need to do, and with specific focus on marketing mix and personalized targeting and security and privacy. So these are the three major areas that they have taken to show what needs to be done in the future. So that's the overview. And main analytics applications in marketing are CRM, which is basically acquisition, retention, and satisfaction of customers to improve their LTV. Then comes marketing mix to optimize your resources and enhance the effectiveness of marketing effort. And then comes personalization, or specific targeting of customers, and the privacy. So privacy and security, these are the four major areas for analytics application in marketing that they state. Moving on to the history, I'll just keep it really short on the history front. So they have given history for marketing data as well as for the techniques. Okay, for the data, it starts in 1920, questionnaires. 1923, AIDA model, awareness, interest, I forgot.
Desire and action.
Yeah, desire and action, correct. So that's the AIDA model in 1923. Then in 1972, IBM introduced POS. That was a major shift where all this retail data, started getting collected from stores. In 1981, IBM again introduced PCs, personal computers. That changed the way marketing data was being used. Like, it gave more power to the marketers, like people like you and me, individual people. Then comes the database marketing in 1987. Then 1990, CRM softwares emerged. 1995, World Wide Web came into existence. So all this clickstream data, page views, cookies data, online advertising, all that stuff came into picture. 1998, Google was founded. Keyword search became big, after that. 1999, Salesforce offered CRM on cloud. So cloud started then itself, 1999 itself, at least for CRM. 2004, launch of FB. So that was a big thing for user-generated content, which led to behavioral targeting. 2005, YouTube. 2006, Twitter came in. And finally, in 2007, we had Apple iPhone that introduced GPS, which led the way for tracking customer location and using that in marketing. So these are the major milestones for marketing data capture in the history. And when you see at the history of marketing analytics, soon after new sources of data became available, methods to analyze them were either introduced or developed, right? So if you take, so like these statistical methods like ANOVA, regression have been on for a long time, since 1930s. But then after POS got introduced, right, then came conjoint analysis, multinomial logic models. These are stuff, that use this data, and then they started these new types of analysis. Conjoint analysis is basically how people attach value to different features of a product or a service, right? So that kind of comes from how much they purchase a product or a service, and why they do so. So these kind of information helped do multinomial logic models and conjoint analysis. Then came, after the web came, clickstream data, etc., started coming in, hierarchical base, to represent customer heterogeneity. Basically, each and every person is very different, and how do we market to them, specifically to them, so that shows the customer heterogeneity, and hierarchical base came in to help that method. That's basically the history of analytics, in overlay with the data. So you can see that here, you can see that here, above the arrow shows the progression on analytics, and below the arrow shows the progression on data. It's a timeline and how they correlate with each other, right? So then moving on to the impact of big data on analytics, right? So specifically on marketing analytics. So basically, the 5 V's, right? So they have explained all that: volume, velocity, variety, veracity, and value, right? So and basically with this big type of big data, how do we deal with those? So earlier we used to have spreadsheets, then we moved on to SQL, RDBs, relational databases. Now with all this unstructured data, you go on to NoSQL, Hadoop, Cassandra, Hive, Pig, and all that stuff. I'll explain all that. Then moving on to so this part, implication of big data analytics. Like implications for big data analytics due to volume, variety, and velocity. So they are saying that majorly we need 4 levels of analysis to make sense of this type of data, which is basically descriptive, which is exploratory; diagnostic, which estimates relations, hypothesis testing, stuff like that. Then comes predictive, which is forecasting the variables of interest and like simulation of different situations of marketing levers that you pull. Then comes the prescriptive, which is to determine the optimal levels of marketing control variables and hence the drive to action, right? So all this 4 is required to make sense of this data, and it's really huge and it's time consuming. So unless we have all these 4 and put them in place together, the time and effort we spend on it won't be really useful, right? So you have to walk all the way from descriptive till prescriptive and get the recommendations out, right? So another mention that they have done here, the impact of this large data is complex models. So there, like, we have simple models, econometrics, stat models. Then we also have really complex models, which are black boxes, right? And what they're saying is complex models like barely outperforms simpler ones on data sets of small to medium sizes. Okay, due to the biased variance trade-off, the moment you use a bigger complex model on a small data set, it's going to overfit, right? So, but then as data gets huge, the optimization based estimation methods like ordinary least squares, maximum likelihood, these methods which are used by the simpler models, they are not really efficient to process this large data inside a complex model. It's basically they become unwieldy, right? So hence they moved on to advanced optimization methods like simulation based likelihood. And then comes Bayesian, Markov chain, Monte Carlo, MCMC methods, stuff like these, which are being used on the black box models. They are definitely able to handle this large data, but they have their own cons as well. and they'll discuss that also, right? Moving on. So this is the part where they explain about the 4 different models that we need to make sense of this data. Then comes, so then comes, how do we handle this big data specifically on a marketing context, right? So they tell you different techniques, which basically the first one is aggregation and compression, right? Compression is basically PCA and other like related methods, which are very common in image and speech processing, right? They are mentioning about using that for this huge online data that we obtain, and how to make sense of it. Like compression is one way to reduce the scale of the data and then make sense of it. They also talk about aggregation. You don't necessarily need to make sense of the data at its granular level. Aggregate it, and fuse different levels of aggregation. Let's say you can fuse scanner panel data, which is basically individual level data, with store level data, right? So aggregate scanner panel to the store level data and then combine them and make sense of those data together. So that is aggregation and compression, one thing they're talking about. Then comes sampling and selection. Like one problem with big data is that statistical inference becomes really difficult, because that confidence regions, they degenerate to really small areas, and it becomes really hard under this huge data to get observations for that small thing, right? So they are saying that sampling would help in this place. Then comes approximations and simplifications to make your life more easier. You can use approximations of the distributions, right? They do this especially on Bayesian techniques. Then you can divide and conquer. You can use bagging, boosting, bootstrapping, all that stuff, right? So these are the major techniques that they have said to yield this huge amount of data, that you want to make sense out of. That's basically this part up until here. Then comes analytics and models. Okay, this is the meaty part, right? So here they tell you about the different models that that are available, and that would grow in the future for marketing. On the left side we have unstructured data and the associated models. On the right side we have structured data, right? Retargeting is basically, let's say you go to a online store for the first time. Okay, you add some products to your cart. For some reason you close the cart and then move away, right? So then let's say in 1 or 2 days when you open some other website, you will start seeing ads for that specific website, where you added items to the cart on this page, which you're viewing. That's basically retargeting. You go back to the customers who are in a stage to leave you, even though they are not like your customers per se, they are potential customers. You go and retarget them again, so that's retargeting. Segmentation. A/B testing is for testing different scenarios, which works, if it works or not, specifically with respect to web design. CRM is age old. GPS and mobile analytics is pretty new, and that is the hot thing that's going on currently. There are like stuff like geofencing, so basically based on your mobile location, on real time, you will be sent ads based on where you are and where you have been previously, right? So that is geofencing, and using GPS and mobile analytics. You have all this trend analytics, sentiment analytics. These are all from social media, social analytics, etc. Path to purchase is basically it suits both for online as well as offline, right? In offline, on these big stores, superstores, etc., how they travel, where to place this items, those comes under the path to purchase. But on online, it really means from which source you are traveling to the conversion, right? So what are all the steps you take? So basically different medias play a role, in taking you to the final endpoint where you buy something, right? So what is that path? That's the path to purchase, right? Online reviews is pretty famous in all websites now that we use, right? So these are the major things that they have explained about the current diagnostic breadth of big data marketing analytics, right? And now moving on to specific ones, let's go to marketing media analytics. I'll focus more on this one. Personalization and privacy is not that meaty, so we'll just focus on the marketing media mix, and then we'll be done. So basically, it's then the conclusion. Okay. Marketing media mix. So as far as this is concerned, what they're saying is new sources of data become available and there are increased opportunities. Basically, how do we move forward? It's the aim for this section for marketing media analytics, right? By new source of data, what we mean is the online word of mouth techniques, right? Online reviews, click streams. So these need to be integrated into marketing mix models. Marketing mix is something that's going to basically tell you how much resources to allocate to which channels, based on their efficiency and their ability to convert the segments of customers that you're targeting at, stuff like that. So what does these online reviews, click streams, etc., how do these help on marketing mix models? That is something that needs to be rigorously researched and implemented, is what they're saying, because they say that they have seen some improvements when they include this data on marketing mix models. So here they talk about how television ads can increase the online search for a specific website, stuff like that. So these are basically crossover effects or synergy effects, that they want to capture. So capturing this has not been perfectly done on the past, and that is something they are mentioning that we have to focus on. Locational targeting of mobile promotions, like I said, it's the GPS geofencing and geoconquesting. So basically geofencing is in your regions, basically you are the top leader there, and the customer is there in your region, and what kind of promotions or what kind of marketing effort will you take to convert the customer. And geoconquesting is basically from your competitors area. So what kind of efforts will you take there to convert them, right? So one difficulty that they have said is how to assign attributions to each touch points for the ultimate conversion. That hasn't really been clear for any case up until now, and that needs to be discussed and researched, is what they're saying. That's and one more thing they're saying is that so we need more planning cycles need to be incorporated into these models so that they are action oriented. So, because our plans for the company and efforts are basically based on cycles or time periods, and that part is not really clear for the model, so we need to somehow differentiate that, is what they're saying. Personalization in general talks about how to target individually. So you have pull personalization, passive personalization, push personalization. So pull is basically when a customer explicitly requests it. Let's say in Dell, right, you can customize your computer by yourself and then you can place an order. That's a pull personalization. Passive personalization is that you give a customized offering to a customer, but then he or she has to act on it, let's say, so these are like coupons, which you have. So like there are many personalized coupons, which are delivered, to you. But it is up to you to go ahead and, use it. And then based on that, further information will be generated, and then they'll be able to customize it. So that is passive personalization. Only when you act on it, it will help them. Then comes the push personalization, so then like there, without any explicit request, you are pushing it, and then checking, if it is successful or not. So that's kind of the personalization efforts that they're talking about. And finally, they come to privacy and security, where they tackle about different, data governance issues, and what needs to improve on that further. So here are the future research directions, that we talked about on each of these areas. Specifically on marketing mix, they're saying how can granular online mobile data be aligned with more aggregate offline data, to shed light on the path to purchase and facilitate behavioral targeting, just to understand which media plays a role. So you need to aggregate the individual data with the high level data and then make sense of it. That is the future research direction for marketing mix. And then there needs to be techniques and methods that can accurately measure the synergy, carryover and spillover across media, which is really hard to attribute, for the final conversion. How do we attribute it to different medias, right? Along with the synergy and carryover effects. And then how can planning cycles for different marketing instruments be incorporated into the marketing mix models? So these are the main directions that I talked about for marketing mix. So that is pretty much it. It's more like a summary of the field and where we are and where we want to go. Any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
So now you mentioned about synergy between various types of sources. So let's say store like Croma and other electronic store, they have the presence in both online and offline. Mm-hmm. So how the basically marketer is going to capture that if a person comes to Croma, okay, he sees the product, but he sees that there's a better offer in online version, so he orders it online. Mm-hmm. So how the marketer will get this kind of data? How are you planning to capture this?
Right. So basically, there should be some touch point on, when the customer visits store, so there should be some kind of touch points, which if they are able to relate with the purchase online, they should be able to link it. But as of now, I'm not sure, not all, if all the companies have, all the required data to completely capture the path of a customer that ends to the final conversion. So that is the gap, from data capture point as well as on the analysis point that they're trying to address. So it is not fully defined at this point. It's an evolving area, is what I'm saying.
Just to add to that, right? In fact, when we were working a few months back on the B2B attribution modeling, and when we were researching in that area, we came across this exact point, which Sinha was just talking about and which Kaswap just brought up. And for companies right now, tracking this data or tracing the customer journey across online and offline touch points, and then combining all of those touch points for one single customer, into one single journey, that is like seeming to be the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges for companies in attribution modeling. And in fact, Sinha, you were also talking a few pages back, you were also talking about that attribution modeling, right? And in fact, one of the papers that was cited here, the Lee and Kannan, that is actually I think that is the most cited paper in this field of attribution modeling. Of course, that is I think that's more of a B2C attribution modeling, but it doesn't matter whether it's B2C or B2B. This problem of being able to or not being able to trace the customer journey across online and offline touch point still exists. And one way, what they say is, at least in a B2B context, from what I have seen, because in B2B companies seem to have a bigger incentive in making those special efforts to track those offline touch points as well, because the deal sizes are much larger. Okay. And so when they have all the CRM systems and everything, and even the way the offline interaction occurs in B2B is kind of somewhat regular, because usually the offline interaction in B2B occurs as part of a customer visiting a booth in a trade fair, giving their details, the sales representative going to the customer's company, pitching the product and so on. So there is some sort of a regularity in which this offline interaction happens in B2B, so it is a little bit easier to track those interactions. But in B2C, right now I'm not sure how they are doing that, and they still consider it as a challenge.
Absolutely, Sai. So let me stop sharing.
So Chroma people ask for like phone number whenever we acquire any product in their store. So won't it help them, like if it's the same phone number is used, because they take it for their records?
Yep. So when you have to buy something online on Chroma website, you will have to register the phone number and the email ID. So using that, you can cross-reference to some extent. Yeah.
In the store also, they ask for phone number before leaving.
Yeah.
So I think maybe just to add to that, so it is still a challenge, because I think I think in either B2B or B2C it is a challenge. So people generally refer to this as an omni-channel tracking, right? So you want to track them across. See, once the person registers, so for example, if it is something like e-commerce, right, it is far easier for you to track them, right? Because you would probably be logging in, or in order to place an order. So even if let's say you have a tablet, you have a laptop, you have a cell phone, and so on and so forth. So across these, if you log in, then you are tracked, right? So at some point in time, if you just log in, you can backtrack all the previous interactions also to that particular person, right? But if you just walk into a store, talk to somebody without actually any digital trace, right? And you go back and order some other place in their website, great, but if it is on a different website, then they have no clue of what has happened, right? So let's say how many times does it happen that you go to some store, you look at it, and you'll say, okay, they are obviously selling it at MRP, right? But if you order on some other website, you get a discount, right? You end up ordering online, right? This is a very common thing. So if you do that, then essentially they have lost the customer and they have no trace, right? So for that, you probably have to look at other ways of looking at this particular phenomenon. It is not very difficult to get that. It is very easy, as long as you have sort of an eye to the ground, an ear to the ground, then you will be able to figure this out in terms of what's happening itself. So what people do in terms of customers is, what they do is, these days pricing is a very important aspect, right? So for example, people say they would see many of the offline companies, they are saying, see, if you have an online offer, we will match it, right? That's happening these days. The other thing that people do is, obviously, earlier we used to, so even now what we do is, even if we find something on a specific online store, we do look at, what the product costs in your favorite one. I'm not just mentioning the names here, right? So in your favorite one, you will check this out, right? So there are programs that are, when I say programs, I mean computer applications that are focused on figuring out what is the price in your website versus what's the price on a competition website, okay? And then where is the maximum, whatever deviation, and then you cut that down and see if you are able to match them or not. It is essentially pricing analytics,
Yeah, Reliance Digital does what you just mentioned, Chaitanya. So when you go into a store, they have the tab in their hand, and as soon as we tell, they show the price which is on this online store, and they tell we'll match this, and we'll even give the card offers also. So you will effectively get it at the same price, sometimes even cheaper than what you get online in their store. At least in the places I've gone.
Correct. See, the online thing is real at this point in time. They have definitely forced. It is not like, see, you get online cheaper at this point in time, right? From a store perspective, right? There is largely only one price, because see, everyone is price sensitive, right? It's not like, who's not price sensitive. It just depends on how price sensitive you are. That's all. Right? It's only just that. Right? So if it is a phone, if there's a 10,000 rupee difference, I am sure everybody cares about it, right? So some people might even care if it is like 100 rupee difference or something like that. So it's just a matter of how much. So, and stores understand this at this point in time. So for them, it is no longer, hey, the online is eating our lunch. It is not, right? They know it is eating their lunch, and they want to do whatever is possible to make sure that they can match it. In fact, some of the stores, they look at, they may have their own product being sold on an online store of their own company, but this particular company is, let's say, a franchise or something like that. Even there, they want to match. So online is in everybody's strategy, whether they are online or offline.
Exchange offers also they are trying to match. Like I showed them the phone and told them that I'm getting 3,000 online. So they were like, okay, I will also give that 3,000 for the exchange.
They would rather get the thing, right? See, with retail stores specifically, or any retail, one of their key metric is how much have you been able to sell, right? If you look at it, see, there are two pieces in their business, okay? One is the fixed part of it. See, their rental, their electricity, their advertising. When it's advertising, the hoardings, things like that, right? Their salaries, everything related to maintaining that store is all fixed, right? But the turnover that happens, that's why it's called a turnover, right? That is variable, and so you can push it to a certain limit, upwards, which means if you sell, right, then this will contribute certain amount to the overall profit to take care of the rest of it. That is their model, right? It's so early. A lot of people feel, see, if I'm selling something, I'm sure you would have seen this in retail stores, right? The mom and pop stores around us, right? So if they have, let's say, 100 rupees product, okay, and they don't sell it below that, because they think if they sell it below that, they're actually making loss. It is not so. Look at DMart, their model is very different, right? So their model is they sell substantially cheaper, but they maximize the turnover. That's what they're after. Okay? So for a store person, if they feel, see, I'm going to lose this business, it actually is worth for them to take a cut in their margin and sell the product, because otherwise they're losing it completely, right? Even if you get substantially lower margin, you're still adding some part to the contribution that you're getting, right? When I say contribution, I mean the overall profit margin that let you take care of all the fixed expenses and so on and so forth. But that is why it makes sense for them to sort of match the price. Okay, all right. Hey, Sina, great work.
Thank you.
Nice. So, how many citations in total?
I think close to 700 or something.
Oh, excellent. Perfect. So, that's a very good metric for us to use, right? To look for this kind of stuff. Okay. Great. So, do send across that PDF to everyone so that they can go through it,
Sure.
what they would like.